Thanks for pressing play on another Dolphins podcast. The NFL Combine is underway, but today we aren't diving too much into draft prospects. Coach Mike McDaniel met with the media Tuesday, so today we're locking in. Our focus is going to be on everything we learned from McDaniel in that press conference, and even later today we are going to dive in to the crucially important NFL PA report cards. But Joshua Houtz, before we get to all the fun stuff, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Happy Combine Day, like you said. Players on the field. It's the Underwear Olympics. I know a lot of the top prospects, or at least some of them, sound like they're going to take it a little easy here and maybe work towards their pro days. But we get a little bit of football, a little taste of that. So stoked to be on the podcast, man. Stoked to be able to talk about the Dolphins being able to hang another NFLPA banner and dissecting Mike McDaniel's presser, because he did give us a little bit of nuggets. But how are you doing today, man?
Dude, I'm doing good. This is a fun week. Like, don't take this stuff for granted, everyone. We aren't going to get to listen to Mike McDaniel. We aren't going to have the Underwear Olympics. We're going to have nothing soon. So I've been having a lot of fun really just listening in, trying to understand all the different perspectives that are kind of coming together at Combine Week. Josh, I try so hard to stay in my lane when it comes to draft stuff. We're going to have Kat back next week to really dig into the combine and really start to set our draft board up. But has there been anything that kind of had you pop up an eyebrow or say, whoa, so far during the combine?
Not really. Last night I was sitting there and I think it was the Abdul Carter, one of the top prospects in this draft, pass rusher. Penn State, they said that he might need surgery and things like that. And I immediately thought, oh, man, I had a Chop Robinson and Abdul Carter playing right next to each other. I was getting ready to post that picture because I thought, maybe in the perfect world, but it doesn't sound like he needs surgery. So nothing really stood out. I'm intrigued to see the way some of these quarterbacks and some of these other players that, could be of an intrigue to some of those teams later in the draft that maybe could trade up, but nothing too crazy, man. Is there anything you've seen that really stood out? I know a lot of players have been talking to the Dolphins, and those are kind of the biggest questions these guys asked during the combine.
Starbucks 100% stood out to me. Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports and Ian Rappaport, NFL Network, apparently they got into a little bit of a feud over a report, Josh, and I don't want to talk too much about that because it's a lot of he said, she said, yada, yada, yada. But lo and behold, Josh, Tom Brady just happened to be at a ski resort in Montana. I think he was in Montana, and lo and behold, Matthew Stafford was also there. And Josh, I just got to thinking, it's happening again. This was, it's just Stephen Ross and Tom Brady hanging out in a bro, and here comes Brian Flores. Like, what a unique twist here that all of a sudden it's happening again. Sorry if I kind of ruined the discussion there, but I think Schultz reported that Stafford met with Brady, and Brady is part owner of the Raiders, a team that would be interested in Stafford. So to me, man, that sounds like collusion. I don't think I'm really going to go ahead and buy that two guys casually met up on Montana on a whim and it was just sheer luck.
Yeah, I wish that was my answer, because when I saw that, man, I'm like, is this real? Is this the Onion or something? I mean, it sounded like, I believe Schultz, said that they were like deliberately hosting Stafford, right? And I think the other report from the agent and Ian Rappaport was that, they just kind of bumped into each other, which, like you said, Jake, there's no way you just bump into each other in Montana. I think they even said how they're a part of the same ski resort or whatever, but this just seems like the same old Patriot way, right? And if this was the Dolphins, my immediate reaction was they would lose a pick, something bad would happen. They'd be banned from the play, a super wild card weekend or something, but it's Tom Brady, it's the Raiders, and they're just going to let it go under the, brush it aside, I guess.
We called him Belichick for so long and Spygate and everything. Was it all time? Like my favorite joke of all time is there was no doubt that Tom Brady was going to break his cell phone during Deflategate because he's always been an immobile quarterback. He's not mobile. That's not the way he works. Sorry, that was bad. But is it possible that this has all been the Tom Brady collusion from the start, and he's been the guy trying to cut corners and game the system like he tried to do with Miami, it seems?
Could be. He could be the mastermind behind all of it. So I like that theory there. I was going to ask you, Jake, if this was a real, like, say, okay, this was a WWE or something, Schultz versus Rappaport, which one of those guys are you taking? I hear that Rappaport's like super small, and, maybe that would factor into this, but I kind of go with Rappaport, right? Couldn't he just call up all of his sources to come protect him or something like that?
I'm trying to think about how this actually went down, because Rappaport, I think you're right, is a little, I think it was just the biggest yelling match. Like, are you seriously going to sit here and say these guys just casually met on a whim in Montana? Like, all I would do is repeat that out loud and say, is this really where you want to dig your heels in? Josh, I don't want to talk about this story specifically, but I do think there's a huge issue right now with national media, with sources, and how stories can be manipulated, and how people are carrying water for other people, and how betting lines are changing just based on Shams Charania tweeting something, and how draft prospect betting lines are changing. Like, I understand that you need to go off something, but I just feel like there's a certain level of manipulation evolving into the national media. I mean, I don't want to talk outside of sports, but especially in sports, it just feels like I see that happening, and you can smell it from miles away, and it just feels a little gross.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we're not going to talk about the overall world picture, but I mean, it's happening all over. I mean, it's been happening with Tom Brady. Like, this is the guy that was just in the press box, in the team meetings and things, and now he's the owner, trying to lure Matt Stafford to the Raiders. So, I mean, there's definitely some crazy stuff going on, and maybe it does all trace back to Tom Brady. Maybe he really is that bad guy that we all kind of painted that picture many years ago.
Fun exercise to get a little warmed up here. Again, totally not throwing shade. We don't know the full story, but it just seems like there are some weird things going on,
No
especially
one had a
in
cell
the NFL.
phone. No one had a cell phone. Like, I thought there might be a video. Like, who doesn't pull? Like, of all the times you're not going to pull a cell phone out. Schultz is yelling at him. Like, come on, someone had to have one.
Yeah, it's the combine. Everybody's trying. Yeah. Good question. Very good question. All right, Josh, Mike McDaniel spoke with the media. Chris Grier didn't. Does that mean anything to you? So I think it was, I don't know if the schedule is updated, but I wrote it for the Finsider. Jerry Jones, I think it was Ryan Poles of the Bears, and Chris Grier were the three general managers who didn't have scheduled times to meet. I think it was Kyle Krabs brought up that there were times in the past that Chris Grier kind of met with people on the side and different things like that. I haven't seen any interviews so far. We are recording this Thursday afternoon, but Josh, does it catch you by surprise? It's such a do or die offseason for the Dolphins. Chris Grier, someone who's been around for so long. He's been around the NFL for so long, where it shouldn't necessarily be a scenario where you're afraid of the lights and camera, and you know what types of questions you're going to get. You've been doing this for so long. Scratching your head at all?
I mean, I guess a little, especially when you say only three of them were not in attendance to talk. I mean, if it's Chris Grier, though, he's probably going to paint the picture that he's just focused on bettering the team, right? They're looking at prospects, they're doing all those, the little nuts and bolts. But and it almost kind of seems like he's kind of hiding it, like ducking and hiding, right? I mean, we know that he can only be asked about the offensive line so much, and maybe he doesn't want to tip his hand and even give out any sort of inkling of who the Dolphins might draft. But I think Chris Grier should be that guy when you're the general manager that goes up there and at least, takes some of those hard-hitting questions. I don't think Mike McDaniel really got hammered with anything crazy, but to think Chris Grier could be up there and he's elsewhere, I mean, that's a little bit of a head scratcher.
I like using the phrase tipping your hand because I think McDaniel was asked some very directed questions. And Josh, every single time, I watched the interview, it was 23 minutes long. There was some of the McDaniel fluff, but instead of trying to decode the fluff and find the underlying meaning, he made his points very clear here. And let's start right at the top here. Terron Armstead, he was asked straight up, is Terron Armstead indicated if he would like to play this year? And McDaniel said, we've been in direct communication with Terron and as recent as last week. He's not ready to make a decision. As a result, I think we have to operate as though he won't play, simply for the execution of free agency in the draft. Josh, I absolutely love that mindset. I think you look at the NFL as a business. I think you look at Terron Armstead as somebody, you appreciate everything he's done, but the idea here of sitting and waiting on your hands is flat out bad business. It isn't something the Miami Dolphins want to do. I don't see this as a slight. I don't see this as disrespectful. I don't see this as a hat tip that, hey, maybe he is going to retire. I just think it's smart business.
Yeah, I agree with you. And when you're the Dolphins, I mean, we're talking about how they have to pinch pennies to try to get under the cap, which they obviously are now. But when you have Terron Armstead eating up so much of that cap space, it would hinder you with free agency and things like that. And as we'll mention, he did take one for the team, so to speak. But I like Mike McDaniel kind of, laying this out there that we're not going to wait around all off season. This could be a guy that decides what. I mean, we've seen it before. Some of these vets, they get close to the season, they start to get that itch. He might come back at that point. But I think Mike McDaniel did the right thing here. And I think Terron Armstead definitely did the right thing by helping the Dolphins out as well.
Ian Rappaport, I don't know if it was it felt planned. It was shortly after this quote came out. Ian Rappaport added that Terron Armstead plans to take his contract down to the league minimum, I'm told, from $28.6 million he was set to make. This allows the team to make all the necessary moves they want to make and allows Armstead, who's 33, to be on the team until he makes his decision. Josh, I think there are a lot of issues with the Miami Dolphins. I don't think one of them is when you have a all-pro player playing ball. This is Armstead walking with the Dolphins, understanding the situation they're in, understanding they drafted the left tackle of the future in Patrick Paul, and Armstead deserves all the credit in the world, man. This is an absolute just classy move. This creates $14 million in cap space. It would have only created $4.3 million if he retires. And Josh, I think the biggest thing here, being a super Star Wars nerd, one of the best lines in Star Wars, only a Sith deals in absolutes. What this move allows is so much flexibility, not only for the Dolphins, but Armstead too.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, it's kind of like you said, it almost seemed planned because we're sitting there, you're hearing this and you're like, okay, there's no way, the Dolphins, Terron Armstead's basically gone. And then it comes out, actually, Terron Armstead's going to work with the Dolphins and lower these cap hits. So it's really what you expect, I guess, out of a guy like Terron Armstead, right? That leader, the vet, 33 years old. I mean, and you just kind of hope that seeing that, whether he's on the team or not, some of these other guys, that might have to tweak their contract to help the Dolphins out this year can see that. And, Steve, what a guy that leads by example did for the Dolphins. So I have no issue with this. I'm intrigued to see if this actually does mean that he's retiring, because I think a lot of people kind of speculate, okay, if you're going to lower that number, you're probably leaning towards retirement. But for me, I'm intrigued to see what Patrick Paul is going to do this year. He already came out and said that he's preparing to be the starter this season, which I don't think there's anything too crazy there, right? You were just drafted in the second round. Terron Armstead's likely going to retire. You're probably already preparing to be that guy, but he's lost weight. He's working out, and he took advice from Liam Eichenberg to stick around and keep working out this year. So when I first read he took advice from Liam Eichenberg, I'm like, oh God, what did he say? And then it was like, just to stick around and keep working out at home. And I'm like, oh, thank God. It was just something like that. So Patrick Paul's ready to step up. We'll see if he has to do that. But I think this was a home run move for Terron Armstead and the Dolphins. And I'm intrigued to see what the next steps are, right? Because now they do have a little bit of money and they're going to have more money to come.
Terron Armstead last season played his most snaps in about 5 seasons. His best game was like week 16, and he was scheduled to be, I think, the 4th highest paid Dolphin. You have no flexibility, Josh, when you're the 4th highest paid Dolphin. You are the starting left tackle. I'm going full fan here. I don't know for sure what's going to happen. Josh, this kind of looks like on March, I think it's 12th when the new year starts, you need to be at a certain salary cap threshold, and the Dolphins are really zoning in to hit that point. What I think's happening here with Terron Armstead and maybe with Calais Campbell in the future is you're just looking at that March 12th date. You want to be under the salary cap. You want to have a plan in place so we can sign a couple of guys. However, when the Dolphins get to June, the roster is not going to be set. All of a sudden, Josh, if you are paying Terron Armstead as an above average backup left tackle, which I can't even tell you what that is, he was scheduled to make $28 million. God, if he comes back and he's making $11 million as a backup left tackle, as maybe your next Kendall Lamb, somebody who's retired, that all of a sudden sounds like an absolutely awesome idea. This idea of the best, or not the best, but the one thing everybody has said about Terron Armstead is has a limited number of games available. So let's plan for a limited number of games being available, whether that's as the swing tackle late in the season, whether it's just your number 3 tackle late in the season, whether it's just, hey, for weeks 4 through 7, we want you to be the backup for Patrick Paul and whatever happens for Austin Jackson. I think that I'm not saying retirement isn't on the table, but I see maybe a plan here that the contract was boiled down so that you can go in, you can get this depth, but Armstead, you're going to make some more money in a couple months. We'll restructure it again or figure some things out where you can be that 3rd, 4th linchpin. Because think about that, Josh, I go back to 2023 every single time that week 18 game against the Buffalo Bills. You had the Dolphins going out there with like their 14th different offensive line combination. And you had the Bills who they were touting out there with the same offensive line group for the 17th straight game. So I think if you could have Terron Armstead, not at $28 million, but as just kind of like a link between what this offensive line was and what it's going to become, I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm ready to run through a wall, honestly, hearing you say that, because I think we'd all rather have Terron Armstead here. I do think, he went down to the league vet. So obviously, if he comes back, I mean, they're going to tweak that again. I mean, there's no way Terron Armstead's playing on that. But to have him as that break in case of emergency, like you mentioned, when we went through so many it was a musical chairs of offensive line in 2023 to have him in that situation where he could come in if Austin Jackson, or, you can move Patrick Paul over there, have him if someone gets hurt, or even use him as that sixth offensive lineman, right? We've seen it with,
He's got the speed.
Yeah, please. I mean, we've seen it with San Francisco, and I thought it would be something maybe we saw Patrick Paul last year a little bit more, but use a sixth offensive lineman, get Terron Armstead out there. And the best part is the guy really doesn't, I mean, he'll need to be in football shape, but he doesn't practice very much throughout the year where, if he just kind of sits there and break in case of emergency, that is the absolute perfect sixth man. I mean, I think I said Liam Eichenberg in the previous pod would be okay as a Jesse Davis sixth man. Could you imagine Terron Armstead being your sixth guy where you could just, break in case of emergency, not to mention what he does as a coach, right? An additional coach in that locker room. So, yeah, man, I'm getting giddy. I would much rather see Terron Armstead on the opening day roster than not.
Jason Peters, God, I think he played like 17 years in the NFL. He retired, and I think he instantly updated his LinkedIn to say he had a coaching job with the Seahawks. So, I mean, I could see this being something like this, obviously getting paid a little bit more. And if you get 6 starts or you need 6 starts, I mean, nobody more trustworthy than Terron Armstead to go out there. Josh, hearing this news, just this news, that Armstead's contract is going down to the minimum and he is still contemplating retirement, does that change how you approach the first round of that NFL draft whatsoever?
I don't think so. I think we kind of all agree that if we're going offensive line, you want to get a tackle that can probably play inside. So I don't think this does. I think if he comes back, though, I mean, that would change everything to me if it was official, right? Like if he's like, all right, I'm playing this year for X, Y, and Z, then I'd be like, all right, get your guards in free agency or whatever, and we'll be good.
I'm in a little bit of a different boat where this was kind of the push off the ledge where I'm like, all right, let's get that tackle. Even if Terron Armstead's your third or fourth, you still need a third or fourth where, hey, all of a sudden you have Kelvin Banks come in and he steals the starting right tackle spot from Austin Jackson. And oh no, all of a sudden you have Austin Jackson as depth or somebody you can move inside and play guard. I think this opens up a path for offensive line to be a good problem for the Dolphins where depth, you just don't know who you're going to have. So you have as many different people as possible. That's kind of where I am. I don't know why or how I got to that thought process, but that's kind of where I am. Hey, welcome to a Brain of a Dolphins fan. When it comes to the quarterback position, the backup quarterback position, do you prefer a veteran or a rookie? Mike McDaniel said young, old. I think all of it is on the table. There's some interesting guys that we're pretty interested in free agency. Josh, I'm just going to rocket fire some. We already have talked about Marcus Mariota. I think it was Schefter linked Mariota to the Dolphins this offseason. I'd hang up and listen. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, not Jacoby Brissett, but Taylor Heineke, Mac Jones, Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz, and Josh, I didn't even know this. Cooper Rush, he's a free agent too, who we were just talking about. So does anybody there stick out to you?
Yeah, man, Cooper Rush, that's awesome considering we just talked about him. I mean, the one that really sticks out to me, I guess, is someone that I would trust to come in and maybe keep things afloat. I mean, I almost said Jameis Winston, and then I'm getting ready to say it out loud. I don't know that I truly believe that. But I would be intrigued by Zach Wilson and Trey Lance because they are those young guys that were drafted high. We know Mike McDaniel was with Trey Lance in San Francisco. Zach Wilson has he wears a visor and has a sleeve, so I'd hang up, listen anytime with that. So I think I'm going to go back to Jameis Winston, though. I feel like he might be that one where I would be okay or confident in taking over that. Oh, that does not sound, I don't know, man. I don't feel very confident in him. I think I'd go with the younger guy who, failed in one spot that you might be able to groom, but the Dolphins need someone that can step in and win games. And I don't know if there's anyone on this list.
McDaniel added, there's guys in the draft they like as well. And Josh, to me, that's kind of the big, like, whoa, hold up a second. You say we don't know if there's these backups who have spent time in the NFL and they've at least seen what it's like to play at the NFL level. We don't know if they can win football games. How can we say that there are rookies, especially not first round rookies later in the draft, who can step in and win football games?
Yeah, and this is where you said that mind of a Dolphins fan. Like I'm sitting there saying there's no vet out there that I can confidently trust. I don't know if there's any quarterback really. I mean, the guy that really stood out to me that I kind of got a little excited on was Jalen Milroe from Alabama, but he sounds like he's going to go probably day 2. He's a guy that might even shoot up there in the first round, if we're being honest. But the one name, and you said, Jake, give me a round. I was thinking day 3, right? I mean, it looks like there's some decent quarterbacks here, but if you're getting a day 3 guy, you're not really trusting them to be able to come in and play. However, the guy I had written down, and I threw this out on Twitter many months ago, was Dylan Gabriel from Oregon. He had some time and played at UCF, played at Oklahoma. So he had some, played in different offenses. He's left-handed, which kind of sticks out, a Hawaiian-born, which I only found out yesterday. So, you would still have that left-handed guy that can kind of run a rhythm, and Mike McDaniel type offense. I just don't know if I would trust him to come in. And again, I don't know that I trust anybody to come in and win if it's not Tua Tagovailoa on this list. So the Dolphins got to figure it out, man, because you're not going to draft a guy much higher than late day 2, day 3, and you're probably not going to pay huge money to a veteran. Do you feel good about Marcus Mariota? Would that be, I guess that's that one guy on this list where I'd be like, okay, I mean, I get it, but is that a lot better than Snoop Huntley? I don't know if it is.
Back to our last show, Josh, the fan reaction, Billy Matson, something like that. What did he say? That you need to draft your replacements. You need people to have fires in their bellies. Marcus Mariota, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Taylor Heineke. I'll say it with a gross face, but Mac Jones, I'll hang up and listen for any of those guys. But Josh, what's stopping them from doing that and drafting like a Dylan Gabriel in day 3? Like, you have 2 7th-round picks. You have a lot of day 3 picks. You have flexibility to move around. Josh, I think one thing we forget about the Mike McDaniel era is that he doesn't shy away from drafting older veterans. Skylar Thompson, Josh, what was he, 24, 26? He was insanely old when he got into the NFL. You mentioned jokingly Brandon Weeden. Taking a shot on a guy who's a little bit older, and then if by week 3, week 4 of the I guess there's only 3 weeks of the preseason, would you be surprised to see someone like that just flat out win a backup quarterback job? Maybe because it's the Dolphins and they thought that Skylar Thompson won a backup quarterback job. But push that aside. I think you could see some sort of scenario where you could go into the season with 3 quarterbacks, and it might even be like the rookie as the backup and as an exciting development. And then you have this level of urgency building in the quarterback room where everybody's competing, and that shouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, and at this point, most teams are going to carry 3, right? That emergency quarterback. But at this point, if you're the Dolphins, man, you absolutely have to. So, yeah, I think you do go out there and get that veteran like a Marcus Mariota, who you at least have a little bit of confidence in that can come in. I mean, I think they might have been linked to Carson Wentz, too, maybe a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But, James, one of those veterans that can come in and win a game. And then, yeah, sure, find a guy on late day 2, day 3 who you think has some, tangibles for this offense that you can maybe groom to be something. I mean, I put Dylan Gabriel down mostly because, he is 24. He can, he works with those. He has that accuracy and some of that short intermediate stuff where I think he might be able to work in this offense. And I guess I put a lot of stock into the left-handed thing as well. So just a name it was gross for me to even say on Twitter, but I've kind of leaned into it a little bit more and been okay with it. So 3 quarterbacks, I agree with you, Jake.
It's the 3rd day of the NFL draft. For anybody who's out there thinking it's not going to be gross, you're fooling yourself. General Manager Chris Grier has mentioned the need to invest in the offensive line this offseason. What does that look like in terms of surveying free agency and this draft? McDaniel said, I'm excited because I think we have a tangible opportunity to improve that starts in free agency with a couple of guys that we have targeted. Josh, at the top of this podcast, you were kind of talking about it. The Dolphins are pinching pennies this offseason. Offensive line, not a surprise, but backup quarterback, another position. Are you surprised that free agency continues to be such a theme for the Dolphins and it's such a high priority that, hey, we are going to need players at backup quarterback. We are going to need players on the offensive line?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, a couple years ago, it probably would have been. I think we even had one of the youngest teams at one point, right? A couple years ago, and they were building that way through the draft. But now, again, backs against the wall for these guys. They almost got to go out there and get vets who they've seen that can play at the NFL level. That they, maybe have experience in some of these offensive systems, or were coached with McDaniel or Frank, whatever it might be. So I think it is it's interesting that they're still going that route based on the way the salary cap is. But I think we can all agree that for the Dolphins, their best interest is to, load up in the draft or load up in free agency, get those guards. And then, even in the draft, like you mentioned, man, a Kelvin Banks, whoever it is, they can never have too many offensive linemen. They can never have too many defensive linemen either. But I'm just happy to hear that they're kind of in unison. They all agree now that, we got to do this. We got to build the offensive line. We got to go back to like we did in 2020 and double up or whatever it might be. And I'm intrigued to see the way Butch Barry and company can figure this thing out, because how many times, man, I think it was Connor Williams, Aaron Brewer. Yes, they're centers, but we kind of all were like, are they going to be able to do this? And they turned them into very, very good centers. So just find some damn guards, man. Anybody that's not Liam Eichenberg or Robert Jones.
Facts. Isaiah Wynn comes to mind as somebody, hey, we plucked him off the street. They did a solid job. And that was kind of like throwing something at the wall, because I don't think that was like we entered the offseason and our plan was Isaiah Wynn. It was like, oh, this kind of fell into our lap. Let's see how it works. Josh, I 100% agree with you. Do you think that Chris Grier didn't attend or isn't being interviewed because it's just going to be all these offensive line questions? Like, how do you think there's something going on in his psyche? Because when he spoke at the end of the season, he even joked like, "Oh, I can't believe how long you guys took to bring up the offensive line." Is that haunting him, do you feel, at this point?
It probably is. Yeah, that's probably a little bit of it. And another thing I was just thinking about, I mean, he got, I don't want to say got grilled, but he was asked some difficult questions right during that presser. At least, I guess questions that had to make him think and, be honest about the future of the Dolphins. Maybe he felt like he just kind of said enough there where he's like, I'm not going to go and reiterate what I'm saying, get hammered again by the rest of the national media or whatever. But again, that's just all you want to see your general manager out there, if not just to show, like I'm not scared of these questions. I'm doing what's right for this team and have confidence in your decisions because I don't know the Dolphin fans have very much confidence in them.
So I really got into I graduated high school in 2012. I really like the content creation, the writing about the Dolphins, everything like that. Like 2013, 14, it really started going once I got into college. And Josh, that 2013 free agency, Mike Wallace, Brandon Elbert, Kevin Burnett, Donnell Ellerby. No, you traded Burnett or you released Burnett and you got Philip Wheeler. I already see the headlines that the comparable, man, to Mike Wallace. Like, you're just like, the Dolphins were so desperate for a wide receiver, they're going to just go and pay the top wide receiver of the class. And it's still seared in my head at the time. I think Wallace's contract was 5 years, 60 million. Crazy. Sorry if that's wrong, but that's just kind of what I had. I don't want the Dolphins doing that with Trey Smith. I'm going to be so doom and gloom for the entire offseason. This team is not going to be fixed with one player. And I pray to God this has been the Stephen Ross experience. You go and you pay for the big guy. I just don't know if he's the right fit. I just don't know about the consistency. Mike McDaniel said here that we have a couple guys that we are targeted. Josh, do you have any faith that maybe they have identified the next? You mentioned it. Connor Williams, Aaron Brewer, these are guys that were kind of groomed to become the players they are. They weren't really identified as these top tier prospects. Brewer was starting everywhere on that offensive line for the Titans, and it kind of looked helpless. All of a sudden, he's a solid center for the Dolphins. Do you have any faith?
I mean, I guess a little bit. I guess a very tiny bit. Like, I don't know that I have the most faith in Chris Grier, but like then you got Frank Smith, Butch Barry, Mike McDaniel, and I wanted to say I have no faith in them, but we kind of saw them, make chicken poop out of chicken salad at times, especially Butch Barry, like you mentioned, the ever evolving offensive line a few years ago. So I say all that. I don't have any faith. My faith level is very low right now, but I'd love to be proven wrong, right? I'd love to be proven wrong that they know exactly what guards they need for this offense. And they bring them in and, they can be healthy and, viable options for the entire season. I mean, we're sitting here talking about Aaron Brewer and we're getting hyped about it. But, I mean, we felt the same about Connor Williams. And then he's no longer here. So we have Aaron Brewer now, but I don't know, man. I'm not very confident.
McDaniel added that he has opportunities to improve the offensive line in the draft, and I think it's a very good time to have some need in the trenches. McDaniel added, it's a time for us to invest in the position, and I'm excited too. Josh, that sounds like kind of going to what I said about Grier. This sounded like this is something McDaniel just said in the mirror. Like, yep, we said this. We were dumb. We said, you guys are more worried about the offensive line than we are. We regret it. I'm going to put this quote as obvious as possible. Stop asking me about it. Were you surprised, Josh? You mentioned it at the top and throughout, like getting asked the hard questions, maybe dancing around some specifics, not to give away your game plan. Are you surprised Miami's like this? All right, we get it. Shut up about it already. It's speaking towards the offensive line.
A little bit. And then again, you wonder, this time of the year, you're not really, you don't really believe everything you hear, right? It's all smoke and mirrors. But I mean, we all see the need. We all know what they got to do. And to hear them come out and kind of echo that sentiment, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit different than what you're expecting when the Dolphins kind of, keep it close to their chest. They're just openly saying offensive line's very good in this draft. There's a lot of depth. We're going to go that route in both free agency and the draft. So a little bit.
Joe Rose, morning talk show, 560 WQAM. He kind of said on his show, and at first I thought this was a very just off the cuff comment where he said, from everybody I've talked to, it really sounds like that Tyreek Hill played a role in the decision to move on from Wes Welker. And at first I'm like, oh, if this is all the quote is, maybe it was said in passing, maybe it was just kind of like one of those drive-by comments where you're not supposed to really take it at heart. Maybe it's just kind of like a he said, she said. And then I think it was the Fins Extra Twitter account or something kind of posted the transcript and Joe Rose retweeted it. So he doubled down on the idea that he feels that Tyreek Hill had a role in letting go of Wes Welker. Obviously, this came up. Mike McDaniel was asked about it. With the change at wide receivers, coach, did that have anything to do with keeping that room, specifically wide receiver Tyreek Hill in the room? McDaniel said, I could see why one would come to that conclusion. However, it wasn't at all. In coaching, especially, I have a high regard for Wes Welker. And generally, in my position, I have to do the hard thing, which is in this case, look past the relationship. It was motivated in things that were much beyond what happened with Tyreek Hill at the end of the season. And Josh, before I open the floor, I just want to add the Finsider, those comment sections are absolutely incredible. Some dude posted I think a TikTok Tyreek Hill did back in 2022 talking about Wes Welker, where he pretty much said, Wes is going to be on your butt. It doesn't matter if you're a first string or a 12th string. He's going to be on your butt. And he's going to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. So, Josh, what says you?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I think Tyreek Hill did have a lot to do with that. And I don't know if you recall, but we did hear the video. I think it was like Jalen Waddle say to Tyreek Hill, yo, Cheetah, you done? And then you hear, and I told you at the time that I needed to go in and fine tune it like the CIA, but it sounded like someone said, well, if you're not going to go out there, then go home. And at that point, I want to tweak it to see who it was. Cause the only person I thought that might be saying it is the wide receiver coach, Wes Welker. Right. So when I heard this, I was like, oh, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but I do think, hearing Tyreek Hill basically say he's going to be on your butt, whether you're, a first round pick, whatever it might be. I mean, this guy was the number one receiver player in all of football by his peers, but that doesn't matter if you're just showing up to meetings like you're running the wrong routes, you're a liability on the field, you're not blocking, the way you're supposed to. And it does sound like Wes Welker, of all people on that coaching staff, would have been the guy to get on his ass. So I definitely feel like there's some truth here. I think Joe Rose has been around the team, longer than we've even been alive. So I trust what he says, but I still hope that this isn't the way of the Dolphins trying to fix the patch, because if Tyreek Hill was that, I don't want to say cancer, but he got Wes Welker fired. He wouldn't go out there on the field. You got to still remove yourself of that, right? It's not going to get better, I don't think, with bringing Robert Prince in or whatever and just kind of shoving the issue to the side. I think it'll spiral. Eventually, it's going to come back up to the surface. So it's not 100% fact, obviously, but I do think eventually, maybe we'll hear from Wes Welker and we will find out that there's some truth to it.
I don't want this to get taken the wrong way, because it's going to sound very soft and it's going to sound very corny, and grown men should be able to talk to each other. Is there any situation here, Josh, where the Dolphins, like they were out of the playoffs week 17, but the season was over weeks before the season was over? Tyreek Hill needs to be out there playing his tail off every single play. However, in this scenario, how everything evolved, I think you can say that Wes is a good coach. You can say that Tyreek, and this was after the 2022 season. So Hill had one good season in Miami, and then he went on to have another after saying that about Wes. What I wonder, tinfoil hat, I know nothing. Could it be a scenario where, you're sitting in the back seat with your brother, sister, and you're playing, you're not touching them with your finger, but your foot's on them, and you're saying, I'm not touching you over, and you're just pissing them off, and you're just stoking the fire until your parents get pissed? Could this just be a scenario where Wes continued to be like intensity all the time, 130%, 100% reason to remember the name, just on and on, where it got to the point where you're like, who Tyreek Hill is, and what's going to happen when he blows up, when he doesn't get his 1,000 yards. You could have prevented that. Like, yes, you're being a coach trying to but in the reality that the season was, I'm not trying to make excuses here either, Josh, but I'm just trying to get a little sense of what could have happened here. Could it have been a scenario where, if Wes just kind of cooled down a little bit and it's the season's over, and not saying go quit or whatever, but just kind of be an 8 instead of a 10? Could that have changed things? I don't know.
It's a good theory, and it makes you wonder, how much different, was he the bad cop to Mike McDaniel's good cop? And, you see the way Mike McDaniel's pampering some of these guys, giving Tyreek Hill a day to go to Soul Runner or whatever it is, and then Wes Welker's the opposite. Where the hell, you're late. Yeah, it could be it could be something like that. I do think the Dolphins, obviously, Mike McDaniel has to get their locker room together, unified, but it could have been one of those things where it just finally bubbled up, because let's be honest, Tyreek Hill comes off like he could be that agitator, be that guy, that doesn't like authority as much. I'm purely speculating, but I do think there's some truth here, again, because it's Joe Rose, man. No one else would be in the know quite like he.
Conflict resolution, I think, is a very important skill. And I'm not saying someone does or doesn't have it, but I think that just might be something worth mentioning. Did Tyreek Hill have wrist surgery? He had surgery on his wrist. It was a ligament issue. It wasn't a broken wrist. He's scheduled to be running very soon, in which he'll be relying upon that in his training until he can catch the football, which will be more around the summertime going into training camp. Josh, this sounds like a franchise that has a plan for their top player, not a plan to trade him either.
Yeah, you mentioned this, and now took a little bit of the wind out of my sail because I mean, is a team going to trade for Tyreek Hill with this like his wrist, bandaged up? I joked with you before the previous podcast. I think that I saw him on Instagram with Brandon Graham and Squan Barkley at some NFLPA thing. And I was like, oh, is he going to trade to the Eagles? But he was wearing this really dirty hoodie, and underneath it, you could see him holding his cast. So, yeah, man, I think this is more of the Dolphins having a plan for him. And again, as much as I want to get rid of Tyreek Hill because again, you need to rid yourself of those type of players. If you are Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer, you've already invested all those picks. You built this offense essentially around him and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle and company. Are you really going to get rid of him for a late round pick with your job on the line? I don't know. So I do think this might be the Dolphins' way of again saying that, like you mentioned, that Tyreek will be back, but all it takes is one team, right, to pick up the phone or one more blow up or this and that. So definitely interesting that he's still the sole runner store 24/7. But yeah, they couldn't hide that injury. They could not hide it.
And two, the big question here is if they do move on from Tyreek Hill, why was Wes Welker fired? Like, I think that instantly comes to the spotlight as a big question too. Who knows? It's a lot of he said, she said. And Josh, we do this podcast as two fans, so please don't take anything we've said out of that context. We're fan theorying here, if we will. Josh, is Javon Holland likely to test free agency? And McDaniel said the line. I think Javon has earned the right to go out and test his market. That's something that I don't look at as a negative because what I don't want is players being here wishing they were somewhere else. Josh, I put that next to Tyreek Hill on the rundown for a reason.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that. Yeah, you did, didn't you? For me, I think, are you surprised by the Javon Holland comments? I'm not. I guess I was going to say this is why Chris Greer wasn't there because you got Mike McDaniel saying exactly what Chris Greer would have said, right? He's earned the right to test free agency. So, I mean, that says it all. Again, I would love to have found a way to get these two to like marry and, become, we could use Javon Holland, honestly, despite his downplay last year, we need a safety out there like Javon Holland. But I think these two guys have both gone their separate ways. And I went back and watched that video from it was the Valentine's Day where he got so salty. Dude, he seemed like legit sad that he was not part of that. And it coming after he basically said, I'm excited to be recruited. I'm excited to, get the bag. It was just wild to me. So good for Mike McDaniel for using that Christian Wilkins quote, I guess.
Everybody should have their own platform. I think they're allowed to. But when you're a 24-year-old with your own platform and you're just kind of talking your emotions, you're going to get burned a couple times, I think. And whether it's feeling that like you were told to kick rocks when Vic Fangio left, or a situation like this, like you weren't involved in Valentine's Day's video, like you had a role in this. Like he played a role in this saying like he wants to go elsewhere. But I love that McDaniel line. And I do hope it's a step in the right direction, whether it was the Shaq Barrett situation, whether it was Calais Campbell saying he wanted to stay. I don't want players being here and wishing they were somewhere else. And that, God, how do you resolve that Tyreek situation? I'm not really sure. But Josh, he says that, and you think it's kind of like that's it. It's all said and done. Javon Holland's expected to move on. But McDaniel, you see the growth. His last line here is pretty interesting. We feel good about his ability to test his market, and if business works out appropriately, his ability to be back here. Huh.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes you wonder if there is still some hope that the Snowman could still be playing in Miami. I just, again, don't see it. I think the Dolphins, from a needs perspective, I mean, you would love to get Javon Holland back here. And would that make him happy? Would he become now, this back to being that elite player? I mean, you don't want that because, again, he was making business decisions towards the end of last year. The thing with Tyreek that really sticks out now that you mentioned that was how many times has he said about missing Kansas City or Mahomes and things like that throughout the Super Bowl, when he was going from one interview to the next. I mean, yeah, this is Mike McDaniel's way of saying, and I don't know that Calais Campbell wanted to be elsewhere, but obviously didn't, right? Because I think he didn't want to be traded. But if you don't want to be here, now's the time to leave. So good on Mike McDaniel. It does sound like in this interview he had a little bit more, he let his nuts hang, Cam Smith style. I always go back to
Puffed
that.
out his chest.
Yes.
Yeah, and my bad. I think I messed up the Campbell. Basically what I was saying is trying to give him a little credit because the Dolphins could have gotten a 2026 fifth round pick for him. But no, he was very verbal. Like, I'm cool staying with you guys. I want to fight. And I love that. So shout out him. Josh, do you remember your last report card?
No, but I was in culinary school, so they weren't as bad as when I was in, high school.
The Miami Dolphins, actually the entire NFL, the NFLPA actually released the report cards, a little fun yearly exercise where players kind of give feedback based on these organizations. And Josh, the NFL is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So all these things are trying to prove is let's shine a little light, let's a little clarity. All these guys should be getting the top treatment in the world, but we know for a fact that's happening in Miami. The only team to get straight A's, and that includes treatment of families, food and dining area, dietitian, locker room, training staff, weight room, strength coaches, team travel, head coach, and ownership. Josh, top to bottom, the Dolphins treat their players well.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to hear, right? I mean, I would much rather, I mean, we'll talk about it later. I'd much rather see this translate to wins, but to hear, all those things for the second consecutive season, I mean, that they are the creme de la creme. And it was voted on by, the survey gets done by 1,695 players. And again, they ranked straight A's all across the board, all 11 categories. I think seven of the 11, they finished first. So, I mean, again, it starts with ownership. We can all sit here and, criticize Stephen Ross, but he puts out the money. He builds these state-of-the-art facilities, the dietitian team, all the way down the board. You got to tip your hat to him for that. So I was a little bit surprised that they were once again there, but I guess not, right? I mean, not much has changed throughout this Mike McDaniel era. And it went back to the fact, do you think this is why he's okay, running things back when you were ranked, your peers, the players, they love everything about the organization. You're not going to fire Mike McDaniel, right? You're not going to fire him after the 2 playoff season, missing the playoffs once. So this could be why we're going to continue to see continuity from the top down. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
If you also consider a lack of state income tax and the weather, owner Stephen Ross and CEO Tom Garfinkel have helped create the NFL's best environment. That was Jeff Darlington. Josh, just because they helped create the best environment doesn't mean they are the best owner, doesn't mean they're the best football team. I 100% understand when everyone's like, oh, well, it doesn't mean they're going to win a playoff game next year. It's been 25 years. Would you rather the owners treat them shitty? Would you rather them be in the situation Joe Burrow's in right now where the Bengals front office is getting D's and how they're trying to let players walk out the door? Last year, we were celebrating Jalen Waddle's extension. We griped about Tyreek Hill's, but that's not they are doing what they have to invest the money and the time. I understand the gripes. We are not happy with this team in general, but Josh, I don't know how anyone could read this and learn from this and say this is bad or be salty about it. It's very weird.
I'm sure on Twitter they're complaining about the slide and how that's affecting things and all that stuff. But yeah, man, you asked if I'd rather them be treated like crap. I mean, I would much rather see them in the Super Bowl, but you don't want the morale to be completely ruined. You don't want to have to worry about losing a T. Higgins and some of these other big name players, which I mean, I guess the Dolphins have lost some big time players. But yeah, man, I think this is a testament to just what Stephen Ross has built and how far things have come for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, I don't know how long they've been doing this NFLPA thing, but I'm certain that they weren't, it's the creme de la creme in all these categories. Even at head coach, Mike McDaniel finished 6th out of 32. From the NFLPA report, said the players feel that McDaniel is highly receptive to the locker room feedback on the team's needs. And the report also indicated that 98% of Dolphins players believe that Mike McDaniel was efficient in his time. So that was 7th out of 32nd. So maybe there's some room there, but ultimately, man, outside of not getting enough tickets for the family at home games, and I think the hotel as well, for the home game experience, they seem like they were just, absolutely head over heels in love with what Stephen Ross, Mike McDaniel and company are building. And we just hope and pray that this year it translates to at least, please God, just one wild card win, right? We just want to get that wild card win under our belt, and then we can look forward to all those other great accolades.
Following Jeff Darlington's post, this was probably what made me the saltiest the entire day. Vic Fangio was also too mean. Good thing they got him out of there, said Ryan Fitzpatrick.
They're spitting on us while we're down, kicking us while we're down.
I just wish it made sense. I just wish it made sense, right? The defense was good when Fangio was here. He left. He wanted to go to Philadelphia. He said he wanted to go. Weaver came in, and Weaver's been great. He's been getting interviews for head coaching. Like, what's the value? What are we trying to prove here? Like, what is Fitz trying to say, do you think? That they're soft? Is it just him saying they're soft?
Yeah, could be. Or I think it's just his way, getting pricking and prying, right? This guy's still, we love Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he's still at heart a Buffalo Bills fan, right? I mean, we see him with his shirt off and things like that. So he's probably just trying to ruffle feathers. But dude, the Vic Fangio thing, we got to let it go. Because if we all knew he wanted to be in Philly, like these national guys, they need to know that as well, right? The Dolphins he was always going to go his separate ways. And the Dolphins should be very thankful they have Anthony Weaver.
The other teams in the top 5 include the Vikings, the number 1 seed in the NFC. So you were saying that if you treat your team well, they can potentially be the number 1 team. Okay. And then you got the Falcons, Raiders, and Chargers round up the top 5. Let's talk about some teams that did bad, Josh. The Jets. The Jets were the only team to get an F. Owner Woody Johnson's average rating for perceived willingness to invest in facilities is 5.5 out of 10 from Jets players, ranking 32nd of 32. The players also feel that Johnson does not contribute to a positive team culture, ranks 32nd of 32nd. The players feel that Johnson is somewhat committed to building a competitive team that ranks 31st of 32 NFL owners. Josh, neither of these teams are competing in the playoffs. Which one would you rather be?
Oh, Dolphins all day, right? I mean, that's awesome to hear that the Jets are in disarray, but I mean, why? I mean, we saw them rebuild Meadowlands how many years back? I mean, why is he being so cheap with things? But it makes you thankful, I guess, for Stephen Ross, right? Because there are times when we probably painted him at
not thankful, but you can deal.
Is a strong word, but yeah. We're okay that he's our guy because at times it felt like, we would think in our heads that this was Stephen Ross, right? The guy that won't upgrade the team, won't help with anything. He always gets his nose into things. It's nice that it's the Jets that's failing. It just the fact that we haven't separated ourselves that much from the Jets, in situations like this, it kind of makes you sad.
That's the gripe. And maybe Stephen Ross just wandered onto a boat and Tom Brady was there one day after the news that we just heard about. Maybe we can't even. No, I'm kidding. That's 100% his fault. Also, the Patriots got a D. I know things are going to change. They just got Mike Vrabel. But Josh, this context is so important. And I understand the frustration. Fans are allowed to be upset. But man, when you're trying to build a playoff team, when you're trying to erase that chalkboard that says it's been 25 years, I'd rather be the team that ranks first. Actually, even not. If I'd rather the franchise that I support treat player families well. I'd rather them treat the players well with a good training room and a training staff. Don't think that's a hot topic. The final thing, Josh, I wanted to talk to you about today, not too breaking of news here, not too much analysis. Dolphins did add a player, Ryan Cooper Jr., he was on the Seattle Seahawks 90-man roster. He signed a futures deal. Last year, he was with the Ravens. He played a total of 6 snaps, and they were all on special teams. Not a lot to talk about here, but I just kind of wanted to bring it up because I think if there's any position the Dolphins do a good job at kind of flipping over any rock and finding something good, it's cornerback when you consider Nick Needham, and Kader Kohou.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I do think it's funny because no matter what we do, our brand is always going to be, no matter how big or small, when we get done recording, some type of news will drop. I think as soon as we posted the last pod, this dropped. And again, it's not some, game. I mean, maybe it could be, but it's not some game changing move, but it's a player that is at a position of need. He can play on special teams like you mentioned. And who knows what he can do with the right development alongside guys like you mentioned, Kader Kohou, who we've seen, become a very good player for the Miami Dolphins. I thought it was interesting. He was nicknamed Bump. His nickname is Bump in coverage. So hopefully that's just because he's, very physical at the line. I only watched highlights. I admittedly know I'll do better than that. I used to go back and do the all 22 thing, but what am I going to find? You said
for Bump Cooper. Don't put yourself up over
yeah,
Bump
I
Cooper.
felt a little bad, but it looks like he can play inside and outside. He did look physical, getting up there. I almost likened him to Kader Kohou, the way he was blowing up some screens in the highlights I was watching. But this is a guy who's hopefully going to just compete. And, again, who knows what can blossom from it. So just Chris Greer's way of leaving no stone unturned at a position the Dolphins have need. This isn't even a flex seal, is it, Jake? I don't know if this even counts as a flex seal.
Nah, this is 90-man roster stuff. We'll see if he can really establish himself as Yeah, start special teams. You get a couple snaps there, and then all of a sudden you make a play. One batted ball, all of a sudden. Hey, I didn't mention Storm Duck. He's still floating around. You even have Ethan Bonner. So cornerback will be a position, Josh. And, that's something that it's one of the easier positions to kind of talk about in training camp and the preseason because it's simple. Like the ball's going to get thrown at them. It's the preseason. How'd they do against it, right? It's not too much heavy thinking is needed.
Yeah, and I mean, when teams are coming out in 4 and 5 wide, you need a stable of them. So the Dolphins have a lot of work to do to booster that back up. So you can see why they brought in a guy like Ryan Cooper Jr., who they might have felt very strongly of in the draft. This could have been an acorn they wanted last year, and they finally got an opportunity. So who knows, man? I think one of the early signings last time was Jonnu Smith, and there was someone else. So they might have a plan, but no, this is not this is more of a ShamWow than a Flex Seal.
We got to end on that. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. If you're liking what you're listening to, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hands up on our end. We are a little more inconsistent in the off season because we tailor the shows based on news, notes, some research we do. So it's a little harder to really identify when we can get you guys some good stuff. So you want to know when we're releasing a new show, make sure you're subscribed. Also, if you'd like a little bit of a video aspect, 560 WQAM YouTube channel, you can find us there. But that is it. That is all the time we have. The snow is melting. The sun is shining. People down south don't have to worry about that stuff. But thank you all so much for listening. Go have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.